And we are recording. Cool. We are up to season 8 of, episode 8 of season 16. Season 8 was a while ago. And so season 16 is rumbling on. We are starting to land the plane here. Tonight, we have a couple of folks that haven't joined us for a while. I think, Jan, this is your first ever appearance on the podcast, isn't it?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Jan has been a part of Connections Online for a while and has done a variety of other stuff with us over the years, but I think this is the first podcast appearance for you. So welcome. We appreciate you joining us. If you can't tell from the accent, Jan is over in Germany and speaks English better than the rest of us. So we appreciate him doing this in not his native tongue. James and I could try to yell at him in German. It would be embarrassingly bad. So we will just stick with English. James, how you doing tonight?
I am still kicking. And I should note, by the way, up front that I'm not doing this as part of my day job. I'm not speaking for the Army or the U.S. government or any other nation, either on Earth or off of it. So those of you who are hoping for the official position of the Martian Congressional Republic, I'm terribly sorry. I'm not providing that either. I know, very sad.
Pretty sure we weren't expecting you to. It's always good to have the disclaimer, and we appreciate you making sure that is front loaded.
I get in trouble if I don't. So
yes, and I was going to get there, but I appreciate you beating me to it. Jan, I'm assuming the same applies to you, but I don't even know all of the affiliations you have. So,
oh yeah, I mean, I'm a free radical, so
there you go.
Nothing to worry.
Are you the free radical, or are you the spider in the middle of the web?
All right.
If he was the spider, would you expect him to admit it?
Depends on the situation.
Well, there's that. So before this whole podcast gets too loopy, let's try and bring us back to topic slightly, at least for a little bit. Some years ago, we had an episode where we talked about the Wargamers bookshelf and what's, of the wargaming books that are out there, what can and should wargamers care about, what are the ones that are of interest of the ones that are out there. And at the time, there weren't a whole lot of them. There were some, but it wasn't a ton of them. In the years since we recorded that podcast, and especially post-COVID, the number of wargaming books and directly related to wargaming or wargaming adjacent has definitely exploded. And there's been a whole lot now come out in the wargaming world for folks to read rather than just playing games. Not that there's anything wrong with just playing games, but the essential wargaming library has expanded quite a bit since then. There was at the time the Dunnigan's Wargames Handbook, the Peter Perlo's book on the art of wargaming had been out. Phil Sabin's Simulating War was out. The Zones of Control anthology was out. And beyond that, there were a couple of game design books that were helpful for wargamers and designers. Salen and Zimmerman's book was out. Ralph Koster's Theory of Fun for Game Design has been around forever, and tons of people have recommended that over the years. However, we've had a bunch since then. Now, that last episode, James, you were a part of that. It was you, me, and Brian Train talking about it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a while ago. It was right after Matt Caffrey's On Wargaming book had been released. So yeah, it's been a while. But we've had a bunch of books released since then. And so of the more recent books, Jan, I'll throw this to you first. Let James think about it for a second. Of the pantheon of wargaming books that have come out in the last 5-6 years, basically post-COVID for the most part. Is there anything that really jumps out at you as, oh my God, this was an awesome book, I loved reading this one, or I really took a lot out of this one? Is there one that really jumps off the page, and it's okay to admit to the one that you were a part of?
Yeah, we get to that, but I think the one that stood out the most to me is Forging Wargamers, the anthology published by Sebastian Bay.
Okay.
A framework for professional military education, the subtitle. It's an anthology published by the Marine Corps University Press, available for free. So I highly recommend either downloading the PDF or ordering the soft cover. And it has a number of articles in it, which I think are of high value to especially those who are either interested to get into professional wargaming or who are already in there. I tend to pull this off my shelf every now and then to reference stuff and to point things out to people. And those articles are focusing on various different aspects of professional wargaming. And I guess some of the most interesting or most valuable ones are about like what sort of skill sets do wargamers need, what sort of jobs do you need in a wargaming team, and all those sort of things. And I believe it also connects to hobbyists who sort of try or wonder like what it would be like to become a professional wargamer. So I highly recommend this one.
Yeah. A question, Jan, on that one. Do you have the hard copy of that or just a PDF of it?
I have both.
Did the Marine Corps University Press ship you the hard copy overseas?
Yes.
Okay. So I wasn't sure if I have my copy that I ordered from them. And the link is down below in the episode description so folks can go hit that link. Again, Marine Corps University Press is a government agency, so they make these books available for free. You don't even have to pay for the shipping, which is kind of cool. So I wasn't sure if they ship those overseas or not to like a non-military address. So that's good to know. All right, so your recommendation there is Forging Wargamers, Sebastian Bay. James, what about you?
I have to unmute my microphone.
Yeah, I was about to say, wait, who's James?
Yeah, right. Me, actually. One of the ones that jumps out for me is, and GMT put this out, is War Games According to Mark.
Okay.
And it's a very idiosyncratic book in its own way, because the title is absolutely what it's about. This is War Games According to Mark Herman. It's not Mark Herman trying to make generalizations. It's not Mark Herman trying to tell you what maybe you would want to do. It's Mark Herman telling you how Mark Herman does things. And I don't always agree with everything that's in it, but I found it was a thought-provoking read, not least because he'll tell you what he's doing and why he's doing it, and he will have it with worked examples of games that he has published, often to great renown. So I found it interesting to read for that. There's been a debate in my head as to whether or not I'm going to try and assign it to students. And there's parts of it where I'm like, yeah, students should read this. And there's parts of it like, we could just skip this bit. And so it's a back and forth about where the balance is against the cost of the book. But that's certainly one of the things that I've read and found was making me think about the business of game design. The business is the wrong term. The craft of game design. It's not the business as in the dollars and cents thing, but why do you do the things you do? Why would you choose this or that? It made me think. And I guess I would see that as useful at both ends, because I think I can disagree with myself on this. I think you're a better player if you understand the design side of the game, if you will, that if you can get inside the designer's head and understand why they did what they did, then you're probably going to be able to play not only better in the spirit, but also the rules of the game as you understand why they were built. It's why it's a line that's originally from Mike Dunn, but I do it as well, and probably many of the people listening. The first thing you do when you get a new game is you crack it open to the designer's notes and you read those. Why is the designer building it this way? And hopefully they explain it.
I suppose that's easier if the designer's notes are consolidated toward the end of the book instead of scattered throughout the book, huh?
This is true, and there is part of me that is always frustrated when they are not. But on the flip side, speaking strictly as a player, I often also appreciate the ones that are, here's a rule, here's the relevant designer's note, because it's right there, and often it makes sense out of what the rule's doing. You're sitting there saying, why are you doing that? Oh, okay, I get it. You're abstracting this in this way. Makes sense. Now I can roll with it. So I am happy with both in their own way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I fully agree with that. And just to add on that, I think especially when we get to professional wargaming, Thomas Danger has made a strong point that we need to be much more transparent as to why we decide which mechanics we use to represent whatever in the game world and what the data is referencing to and so forth. So I think there should be, and I'm missing that often in commercial games, right? I often think like the designer notes at the end, they are not sufficient. I mean, I get a vague idea of what the perspective of the game designer was, but it doesn't give me any insight as to why they picked a specific mechanism, for example.
Have any of us ever run across designer's notes that were longer than we wanted them to be?
Huh.
I'm thinking on my end, the answer is no. So,
no, I don't think so. No.
So some of the historical reference books that are in the games from Red Sash Games run 200-ish pages, but that's more the history of what you're seeing in the game than it is the designer's notes of how that got converted into game mechanics. So that's probably not in the spirit of what you're asking.
No.
But I can't think of any that, I looked at the designer's notes and just kind of rolled my eyes and said, oh my God, this is taking forever. So I think you're probably spot on there, James.
Like Jan, there are some that I've read and I'm sitting there saying, that's it, right? You didn't actually explain anything, or you told me about your inspiration for it and then you didn't go into the how and the why, but that's a different frustration. Those, if they're not going to tell me what I want to know, then they don't need to be any longer.
Yeah. For me, though, the one that jumped out that I enjoyed more than most of the others, but for various, one of the reasons, quite frankly, is that the chapters are fairly bite-sized and self-contained. So it was easy to read them almost as magazine articles than try reading the book from end to end. And that was the Euro War Games book. And Jan was a part of putting that book together. But so I'm not just saying it because Jan's on the podcast. I legitimately, it was, to me, that was a good way to read that kind of book. It's not that I have a short attention span issue or anything. My kids might argue with that, but really, one of the things I liked about Zones of Control is that as discrete chapters covering their own things, you got some fairly dense, not in terms of difficult to understand, but the words to meaningfulness ratio was very high because folks had limited chapters to work with. They weren't trying to fill page count like some books can occasionally feel. Euro War Games was much like that, as more of an anthology type collection that I felt the density was pretty good in that I was getting meaningful content on every page rather than trying to, sort of skim past a lot of the fluff to get to real meaningful content. And that was something that I liked about the Euro War Games book. One of the other things is, let's face it, a lot of what we cover, both with the Dragoons and in the wargaming world as a whole, can be very U.S. centric, and there is a lot to be learned from other, from cross the borders, from other places, and some of the perspectives that you got from Euro War Games, I found interesting. Didn't agree with all of them, but I did find them interesting. That there were some good, what I thought were some good points, and some very well articulated and well supported points that were completely different viewpoints that I think a lot of American audiences wouldn't consider and a lot of American audiences wouldn't write. And so I think that was a net positive in terms of broadening the horizons for some wargamers. That I think it's a book folks should at least check out and, read a couple of chapters, borrow it from a friend, get your own. Is it, I think it's out of print at this point, right? Nuts sold out of what they had.
Oh, I don't know. I need to check with Nuts.
Yeah, I think they may be out of print right now, so you might have to be borrowing it from somebody.
I do know that when I went through my bookshelves in the last hour to dig up things that might be relevant for this, I was looking for my copy of it and realized that it's out on loan. So that's certainly a recommendation.
So James is preemptively doing exactly what I am telling folks to do, which is go get a copy and read it. So. But yeah, that's the one that I throw out that was one that I enjoyed for the varying perspectives, as well as for the kind of discrete bite-sized chapters that you could knock out a chapter in an evening, ruminate over it for a day or so, but have a satisfying experience of getting that without feeling like you're having to slog through a giant book to go through it all. And I found that to be a good way to approach the topic. Forging Wargamers, I found to be an interesting read. Jan, I don't know if this is something you intended to impart when talking about Forging Wargamers. To me, it seemed very specifically targeted at the professional audience without a ton of crossover reference to the hobby folks. I putting the hobby lens on it, I didn't find it as useful. So,
yeah, that's true. I mean, it's the main focus is, I guess, like what do we need to take into consideration when we try to institutionalize professional wargaming. Mm-hmm. And that might be sort of my personal perspective on it. I thought there are points in there which can be of interest to at least those players in the hobby community who are open to thinking about the professional application of the method and pull inspiration from that back into playing games as a hobby.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. To be fair, when Sebastian wrote the book, he was aiming for the professional audience. Like that was the entire intent of what he was doing. And part of the problem he was trying to solve, I haven't asked him this directly, but I would suspect that part of the problem he was trying to solve is the one that we talked about at Connections Forever and just came up a few weeks ago in the conversation with David Banks and Ed McGrady, which is there hasn't always been a clear set of pathways for new entrants into the professional wargaming field. It's sort of something you kind of stumbled and backed your way into, and if you had the right connections, you could find a way to get to that point. But we've never really built a good set of scaffolding for those new folks to climb into the field. And I think that was something that Sebastian was trying to get to, is here's how to bring those new folks in and how to use them and what you can do with them institutionally as a part of that. That was my intent, my impression of his intent. So. James, has Forging Wargamers crossed your desk at all?
Well, yes. If you look inside it, I wrote the forward.
Okay. To be fair, I skipped the forwards on everything.
Yeah, and I understand that. Because in part, the job of the forward is to it's an intro that people aren't going to read, which is sort of the frustrating bit. So you wind up going through it, trying to find thematic lines that you can claim exist in the book, which may or may not have existed in the minds of the people who built the anthology, and pretend to tie it all together. Yeah. So it has been a while, and frankly, I read it for that, and I have a copy sitting somewhere. I'm actually not sure where it is, because at that point, I had read all of the articles, and that was a number of years ago, and they sort of drifted out of mind. So I'm glad that Jan found it useful.
Everything but the forward, huh?
That's right. Yeah. That, obviously, you could just put down the garbage.
Yeah. All right. So right there, that puts 3 books into the discussion for other folks to take a look at and consider, as far as books that a wargamer may want to put on the shelf and take a look at and read sometime to help with a better understanding of broadening the hobby some. As we look at some of the others that have been released, I know that the majority of the ones that are out there seem to be heavily focused toward the professional space. Aggie Hurst's book, The Politics of Play, the Maurice Suckling's book on paper time machines.
So I'd argue that it's not aimed at the professional space in the military sense. It's aimed at the academic space.
Yes.
It is. I don't know this, but it reads as if it is built to support his PhD course in wargaming. There were good things in it, but I found it at times very frustrating to slog through essentially endless diversions into consider these sources and bang, next point.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
One of the things for clarification when we start talking professional wargaming, James brings up a good point of kind of the distinction between professional versus academic. I think as we address it here with the Dragoons some, and as you'll see with things like Connections Online and some of the other places that we bring stuff up, we'll talk about professional wargaming and usually put a bunch of qualifiers behind it that we're not just talking military and defense purposes, but the academics, the intel guys, the NGOs, the emergency management folks, people that are doing wargaming for a more serious purpose than let's just have fun recreating history. And that's generally been a pretty broad label that we've dropped on professional wargaming as a whole, that it makes sense that everyone's impression immediately goes to the defense space. It makes sense with the people we have as guests here that everybody's impression immediately goes to the defense space. But I do want to note that when we do talk about that professional space, it's not just the defense guys, the emergency management folks are a part of that conversation. The intel folks are a part of that conversation. The giant bug that just flew past my head is not a part of that conversation. So I'm going to mute my microphone while these two guys talk about smart books for a second, and I'm going to try and kill this damn bug before he attacks me. Y'all go for a second, please.
I can't remember when the first volume was published, but the second one, I think, came out in 2023. That's Natalia Wojtowicz's and now Natalia Schwarz's books on wargaming experiences. The first one was on her experiences running war games for NATO, and she went through several sort of use cases and described how they went and so forth. And then the second one was a bit more, how should I say, I guess, explorative, trying to work through definitions of, I mean, there's an endless debate of what a wargame is and what's not a wargame and so forth. Definitions of professional wargaming, and I think she comes up with a sort of a list of aspects. They are still, if I remember correctly, they're still sort of relative to the context of use. So she doesn't end up writing the definite definition of professional wargaming, which I don't think there will ever be one. But it's still an interesting read because it compares the various different perspectives we have on the method and the use cases. I would say that I found reading the second volume not as enjoyable as the first one, but yeah, still something that you should have a look at.
I confess I have not read either of them, so I will go out back and apply the switch to myself in penance, but I need to get around to it. I've read a number of her articles, but I have not read the books.
And give yourself a homework assignment.
Yes, I know. Yet another one. The pile of shame only grows, right?
Right.
In this case, it very much is a shelf of shame as we expand on it. It's not just the milk crate of shame. All right, the bug is now dead. I'm not sure what it was. It wasn't all that big. It was just annoying and a little bit freaky.
That's how the first alien contact went sideways.
Yes, it is now dead. Whatever its alienness was, I no longer have to worry about it. So, Jan, I did catch part of that as you were going through it, is in comparing some of those, the books themselves to some of the articles or some of the other books. Is there redundancy in what it is that she is discussing? Is it a little too off topic? Is it more than it needs to be for what it's trying to describe? Is there something in particular you can get a little more in detail on as to why it fell flat for you?
Oh, I guess that's just my personal perception of the way it's written, right? Because it has this sort of exploring character, and then it goes into discussions with other peoples and their perspectives, and then distills aspects out of those and moves onward. It's not like, maybe I'm just more used to a sort of academic way of writing where you have like, well, this is the definition and we go systematically. This is more of a sort of meandering, exploring kind of book.
More stream of consciousness.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah, that makes sense. Truthfully, that can kind of drive me nuts on occasion as well. So I totally understand where you're coming from with that perspective. So, James, similarly, is there one out there that maybe fell a little flat for you somewhere?
I guess
You're
I'm
trying
going
to be nice and not pick on anybody, huh?
Yeah, well, so many years ago, I ran across some reviewers' comment that they were not going to review things they didn't like because life is short. And behind anything that somebody has put out there, somebody has frankly probably put blood, sweat, and tears into getting that thing out, even if it turns out that in your opinion, it's terrible. So yeah, there is a certain impetus to be nice. Equally, when I was doing reviews, I figured that also I had a duty to the reader who was thinking about buying the game, the book, whatever. And you do need to tell them, hey, this is or is not for you. So you got to be even-handed on that, so to speak. You can't be just on the side of the people who made the thing. You've also got to be on the side of people who might pony up money and then be disappointed. So I'm going to say no. If I can go in a different direction, two things that I was going to point at that I think, in fact, everybody could stand to read. The number of wargame handbooks that are out there has grown a lot, which is a good thing. I am still, if I had to pick one, it's the British one, Defense Wargaming Handbook. It is short, it's to the point, it's really well written, it's really clear. So I assign it to my students as the one out of the growing field that's there. It's not that the others are bad, but I still think that it's the best of them. And the other thing that I think gets less attention than it really deserves is John Curry's History of Wargaming project. He's got I have no idea how many of them are out there now, dozens. He is rescuing old rule sets and getting them back into print.
Yeah. I think we had him, I mean, we discussed his on that original podcast way back when, with you and me and Brian when we were talking it. So that is one that has been around a little bit that we we were able to cover then. So that one has been discussed. Natalia's books, just as I'm making notes on all the ones we talk about so that I can remember them all for, putting them in the show notes, looking up Natalia's 2 books. Both of them are out of print at this point. So both of them are going to be a little pricey and a little tough to find. Just warning folks up front if you do go looking for those.
I believe they are both print on demand via Amazon, aren't they not?
Amazon is showing out of print limited availability for both of them. So it doesn't appear to be showing some sort of print on demand option. Now, if I'm looking in the wrong place, I've got them linked. People can go take a look and see what they want to for themselves.
It might be that she's redoing the first volume.
Could be.
I have a vague memory of discussing that with her.
Yeah, it could be. So, James, to your point, I mean, the not every book is for every person is absolutely valid. Not every game is for every person. You will like this game if, you will not like this game if. I think those are valid points as a part of that. I think that goes back to one of the things for me for Forging Wargamers, because I do dabble some in the professional space, obviously not to the extent of many other folks. I found it, interesting from that perspective. I think someone who is a hobbyist and is well-versed in hobby war games and history, but has no interest or design in moving into that professional space, that's where something like War Games According to Mark may be something that is a little more up their alley. So. Yeah.
And in fairness, I'm often reading these things with an eye towards, should I assign it to my students?
Yes. A question along those lines for the anthology books like a Zones of Control or a Euro Wargamers, the Euro War Games anthology. Is that something that you give them the whole book and say, here, read this, or are you picking out particular chapters along the way?
For almost any book, for most purposes, I'm going to be picking out this chapter, that chapter. And a lot of the question is, in effect, it's being a good steward of the public money, right? You're saying, all right, if I'm going to make either the student or the university buy this book, are you going to get enough value for money out of the cost of the book? And if I'm picking one paragraph out of a big book, maybe not, right? If I'm having you read the bulk of the book, then there's probably a good case. But it's also, in effect, it's kind of like a cage match, right? Because in the curriculum, there's only time to read so many things. So if one thing comes in, something else has to be punched out. And I'm weighing what's the value of this against that, trying to figure out where it goes.
Yeah. Let's flip back over to Paper Time Machines a little bit, because I feel like we pivoted off of that pretty quickly onto some other topics, especially once I got attacked by insects. So if we swing back around to that, you had said something about that it seemed a little more aimed at a particular purpose with an academic audience.
I don't know this for sure. I've never talked to Martin Suckling, so it sucks to be me. But I got the sense that it was written to be used in a graduate level course on wargaming for people who are not familiar with wargaming, and to give them a academic critical look at it and framework for it. And I'm not saying it's a bad book for that purpose. I suspect it does very well at that purpose. And up at, I think he's at Rensselaer Polytechnic or Rochester Institute of Technology, sorry. And it may well be something that is assigned there and works very well for that. But for the purposes of what I would be teaching my students, it trips over itself in trying to be very definitional and precise and splitting things out. And I think my students would look at this and give me this glassy-eyed stare and say, what the heck? Mm-hmm. So again, I'm not saying it's bad, right? This goes back to the earlier discussion of it. I think it's built for a particular purpose. I suspect it does that particular purpose pretty well. But if you're not having that purpose, you may not find it as useful.
Yeah, that's fair. I think, given what we've talked about over the years and the familiarity or lack thereof with wargaming by much of the public, having some sort of introductory level, what is wargaming sort of book probably isn't the worst thing. That one, again, may be targeted more towards an academic audience versus a hobby audience. Okay, fair. But that might not be the worst thing for people to really dig into.
Yep.
So that's a thought. Could be.
Yeah, I also think it's sort of it's symbolizing that, or an indication that there is a growing academic interest in analog games, because I mean I've been involved with the digital historical game studies back in 2015-16 when they came over to Germany basically. And there was nothing really going on. I mean, there was this one analog game studies journal that has been online for I don't know how many years, but it wasn't established as a discipline, and I think that has been growing since. And there have been more books in this sort of vein. Riccardo Mazzini's book, The Hexagon and the Sword, which goes in a sort of similar direction, also focusing on hobby war games. But with a sort of academic lens to it. There's also been Amable Holland's Cardboard Ghosts book, which also I think is from that category.
I was getting ready to bring both of those up. I wanted to ask you about Riccardo's book, because I know that's one that, if I recall correctly, you said you'd seen it in a couple of different draft forms over the years, right?
I have not. I will confess, and I hope Riccardo will never listen to this podcast. I have never read it.
For some reason, I had it in my head that was one that you had seen sort of ahead of time in development, but maybe I'm confusing that with a different book. So my apologies. I didn't mean to have you confess deep, dark secrets for Riccardo to get mad about. It was not my intent. So
I am also in the category of shame on that one. And in some ways, right, what this is pointing to is the last time we did this talk, everybody had read everything.
Yes.
And at this point, it's no longer necessarily reasonable to assume that everybody has read everything. And potentially, we can't have read everything, given the demands of the rest of our lives, which is a good thing.
Yeah, I do find it interesting. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to come back around to this, is that, it's not that we were struggling for things to talk about, right? Because you and me and Brian trained to talk about wargaming stuff, and we can go for a couple hours, and that's fine. But we were having to do deep dives into the handful of books that we were describing, and we were even pulling things off the web to talk about of, Greg Kostikian's famous essay of I Have No Words and I Must Design. Like, that was a part of our conversation because the bookshelf was pretty limited, right? You had room for a really nice bookend and probably a display piece next to it on the shelf. And now, like, it's a pretty full shelf and adding a few more things. So it's not the worst thing that could happen to us. Jan, the other book that you had just mentioned also was Cardboard Ghosts.
Right. Yeah, but Amable Holland, I highly suggest it. There just recently was an online article by a news outlet, which I'm blanking on the name, of her and Cole Werle sort of giving an interview on sensitive topics in historical board games.
It was from Wargamer.com, which is like the first wargame article they've written in 8 years.
Right. Yeah, but I think if you want to talk about or read about like sensitive topics in game design, then those two folks are where you should start looking. Anyway, the Cardboard Ghosts, I don't fully agree. I just mentioned my background is from getting into professional wargaming, was from the digital historical game studies side. The core point of the book is that analog games, due to the sort of tactile character of moving things around, helps players understand system. Like systems of basically the model, we would say, professional wargaming, the model of reality, right?
Yeah.
And the representation that it is. And the point I don't agree with is that she sort of singles out digital games from that, even though she does play them a lot and she does reference them a lot. I don't think that it's so clear of a distinction, even though I totally get sort of the benefits that analog games have over digital games. But
yeah, so I have not read Cardboard Ghosts, but I have followed a whole bunch of her online video essays because they're very enjoyable, both from the perspective of making you think and because she makes entertaining videos. My impression of it was that the Mechanisms and Metaphors video had some overlap with Cardboard Ghosts. Is that accurate, or am I mistaken in my impression there?
I would agree. I think, yeah, that's a fair assessment.
Okay. So I've got the Cliff Notes version in that I really enjoy the Mechanisms Metaphor video. The book is in my Amazon wish list that at some point somebody will probably pick it up for me as like a birthday or Christmas gift somewhere along the way.
It is part of my shame list as well, although running off of Jan's summary, because I do not remember the video, although I'm pretty sure I watched it since I watched most of her videos. I would definitely agree that people learn the system in the board game better than they do in the computer game because they have to. They don't have a choice. Somebody else is saying people are smart, but people are lazy. And if you make them do the thing in the game, they will learn how to do the thing in the game, and they will learn the model, and they can talk about it later and critique it or agree with it or whatever. And all too often in the computer game, they click on this unit, and the computer says, here's where it could go. You say, ooh, cool, I want it to go there. And you never get to ask or get around to asking, why can't it go to this other place? And we see this often when people have learned a game on the computer version, and then they come to play it on the board game, and they don't know how to do anything. There are absolutely people who will put in the work to learn how the computer game systems work, but they are rarer, and they have to, one way or another, either they need to have a reason to do it, to put in the work, either their own personal interest or somebody's told them they have to.
I think the smart but lazy thing is accurate. That said, I would say that Amabel's video is a bit, first of all, like it's an hour-long video, so it's not like, you're getting a 30-second TikTok synopsis of a 300-page book. So just to put that to bed, anybody that thinks, oh, I'll just go watch this snippet of video. No, that's not what's happening. You're getting a full class lecture. It's not presented as a lecture, obviously, but it's that kind of time frame that you're talking about investing for the video. Absolutely worth it. But I think, we're of the generation that, let me read what it is you're doing. Don't give me the video of somebody summarizing what they've read. Like, I want to read it. I'm okay reading. I'm good for long form. That's fine. It's just, as noted, there's only so many hours in the day. And this goes back to one of the reasons why I like Euro War Games and Zones of Control is that as anthologies, they've got some pretty bite-sized chunks that are very easy to parse through.
Season 16 of Mentioned in Dispatches is underway, and we couldn't do it without our Patreon supporters, and especially the regimental captains at the top level. The Armchair Dragoons would like to thank Chris Anthony, James M., Brian Silcott, Chet Bell, Joseph Knorr, Paul LaFontaine, Miles R., Staggerwing, Fred's Dog, and Fred 2, Kevin Bertram, Michael Sunborg, Patrick Garrity, Catastrophe Games, Hethwell War Games, and Greg from Pico Armor. They help us to keep our objectives in our line of sight. You too can support the Regiment of Strategy Gaming as a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/armchairdragoons.
I wanted to throw a couple of others out that may not be right on top of people's minds, but I'm curious, what folks think, what some impressions might be of what's out there. One of them I've been a little loath to bring up for sort of self-deprecating reasons. Aggie Hurst's Politics of Play, Wargaming U.S. Military. I think I've got that full title correct. I'm probably not. Wargaming with the U.S. Military.
Yes.
This is an outgrowth of Aggie's research towards her PhD. Interesting book from the professional side that talks a lot about how the U.S. military uses war games, but not just the way in which it can shape sort of some training or analytical purposes, but the way in which it changes or affects or impacts the participants in the games themselves. I'm curious about your guys' thoughts if you've read it or read any of her articles leading up to it that got incorporated into it. The caveat that I'm going to throw out there to the audience about this one, and the reason I was, a little the self-deprecating part of bringing it up, I'm quoted in that book way, way too much. I was one of the people she interviewed for that book. And when you take a look at me appearing in that book versus somebody like an Ed McGrady, who actually has made a living out of this instead of being a gadfly like me, there's no way that I should have been quoted in there as often as I was. So I'm going to apologize in advance for folks reading that book for the amount of times I show up in there. I'm sorry.
Who is that?
Thank you, Aggie, but I'm sorry. James, what were you saying there?
Who is that Brandt guy?
Yeah, no kidding. Somebody should have taken away his microphone way earlier than they did. to throw that one out. Jan, any thoughts on that one? Is that one that you've had a chance to dig into at all?
Oh yeah. I do quite like it. I do agree with what James said earlier, that it's sort of sometimes it's hard to get through it. But what again probably is my sort of humanities background perspective on games. What I like about it is that even though she is investigating professional wargaming and its applications and what it does to players, it is not from the usual sort of simulationist perspective, which I have my problems with anyway, but more from the humanity sort of perspective, understanding the logic of play and the psychology of it, what it does to players, what it does to how they think and behave, and the sort of effective part of decision making and all that sort of stuff. So, and I think that's important to understand even for professional sort of wargamers, if you're a facilitator or even a designer, to know what the game does to your players and exploit it in a way. But I do like the approach of, or the highlight she has with how to use games for critical thinking, basically, and critical understanding of the method and the play.
Yeah. If you are not comfortable with academic writing, Aggie's book will drive you nuts.
Yep.
If academic writing is something you are okay with, then it's going to be worth getting through. If the kinds of writing that you find in academic journals or professional journals is the sort of thing that you think is a slog, you just signed up for 250 pages of slog. That is the approach she takes, because she is an academic, and that's how she's going to approach these things. If that's not something that you're used to, you're having a huge mindset shift as a part of picking up that book. Just wanted to get that out there. A couple of others just quickly to kind of run through and sort of pluses and minuses, or hits or misses here or there. We had mentioned some of John Curry's History of Wargames project earlier. He also has his Matrix Games Handbook, which is a very sort of prescriptive, specific tool for developing Matrix Wargames. Not Matrix Games, the publisher, but Matrix-style wargames with a Matrix-style adjudication. That one is a very specific, almost task-focused kind of prescriptive toolkit for approaching wargaming. But I think that one is relatively recent-ish. I don't think it's one we had talked about last time around, but I do think it's one that may be worth looking at. Jan, any thoughts on that one at all?
I guess it's useful. I don't know that I took that much out of it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of those ones that if Matrix Wargames are something that you are doing, it is very useful. If it's not something that you do, then maybe not so much.
Actually, in a sense, I turn that around.
Okay.
If Matrix games are something that you're doing, you already know it's in the book.
Oh.
If they're not something you're doing, then it provides a good primer.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
in that sense, is it useful to me? No. But is it useful when I hand it to somebody to say, hey, this is how you learn to make a Matrix game, how to run a Matrix game? Yes.
Okay. So that's sort of the opposite direction that I was looking at.
Right, but that's a function of it being, as Jan put it, it's a very prescriptive book. And yeah, it's telling you this is how to run one so that it works, and these are your options, and so on and so forth. So in that sense, it's built for a beginner, and it's good for a beginner. And that's not slamming it by any means. We need books like that out there.
Yeah. Years ago, Nicholas Palmer had published the Comprehensive Guide to Board Wargaming. I mean, this is 77 or so, right around the same time as the Complete Wargames Handbook, and yet Dunnigan's book is the one that's more famous. Is it just simply down to it's Dunnigan, therefore, or is there some material difference between the two books, do you think? James, any thoughts on that one way or the other?
I don't know, in part because I think I've never read the non-Dunnigan book.
The Comprehensive Guide. There was a downloadable PDF of the Comprehensive Guide to Board Wargaming floating around out there online for a while. I want to say it was archived at archive.org. I will confess that I'm not 100% sure what the legality of its presence on the web was, but it was there, and you could go get it.
PDFs of Dunnigan's floating around as well.
Yes, but that one was at least reasonably authorized because it was hosted on a website owned by Jim Dunnigan.
Fair point.
So I think we could probably claim that was legitimately put there and not an accident or somebody trying to sneak something out. So for those wondering, it was hosted at strategypage.com.
Jim Dunnigan's name has magnetism for those of us old enough to remember SPI, right?
Yeah.
So that's going to be part of it.
Yeah, there is definitely something to that.
If Starrett writes a book and Heinemann writes a book, everybody's going to read his because who the heck is Starrett, right?
I would read your book.
Yeah, but
maybe not first, but I would read it. I mean, I'll be honest about it. I might not read it first, but yeah. I'm torn on how to discuss Martin Kreveld, how to discuss his book out there on what was the actual title of it? Doggone it. I had it right in front of me and then I shuffled windows around. Oh, War Games, A History of War on Paper.
Can I pull out a historian hat for a minute?
Well, let me just caveat it with, I have not read the book. And one of the reasons I haven't read the book is I've read a couple of his magazine articles that were absolutely infuriating for how much they gloss over and leave out and magnify things that were unimportant while, glossing right over the things that really did matter. So I haven't touched the book.
He has a history of writing books on topics that he thinks are not written about. And this is not originally my phrasing. It is the phrasing of one of my instructors back in grad school. He writes about something and he gets so much wrong that he pisses people off and they write good history about it.
So he serves a purpose.
He serves a purpose, but I would approach any of his books with with some salt, right? Some caution. One of the pairings that I know best is he wrote a book on logistics back in, I guess, the 80s, since I remember reading it in the early 90s, that was all about how vitally important logistics is to the history of military campaigns. And the response within a couple of years was a book called Feeding Mars that could have been subtitled, Let's Correct Everything Kreveld Got Wrong. But on the other hand, in the process, he is waking people up to, hey, maybe you should actually pay attention to this. And he's right about that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's good to know that my thoughts on not spending the time on the book was probably accurate based on my previous, time wasting reading some of the magazine and journal articles he'd written. So I think I will probably safely skip the book. I think that's a fair place to go. Jan, I if you turn around and say, well, I thought Kreveld was a genius, then okay, fine. Like, that's cool, but make your case.
No. I haven't read it. I don't know.
Okay. Beyond that, which books should wargamers be considering that we haven't brought? And I say books, they don't have to be full books. If there's some sort of, extended long form article out there somewhere similar to Kostikian's famous I Have No Words I Must Design or something else, what else is there that we might be missing? Because we've covered a lot of ground tonight, but I'm sure we've missed something somewhere and we'll probably get yelled at about it in the comments. So, Jan, what have we missed that we should have hit? I mean, it's a good sign when you really have to think about it. So I'm not taking that as a bad thing.
And thanks for calling on him first, so I get extra time to think.
Yeah. There have been some sort of journals and articles out there. They are maybe the one the Peruvian Naval War College did. There's Natalia has an article in it, and Sebastian Bay as well. And Sebastian's is on the use of micro games for education purposes. Which is a good one.
I'm not sure I've ever even heard of the book. So
it has a Spanish name, of course. It's a journal.
Okay. I will wait for you to send me the link that I can attach to the
I will do that.
To the episode here, because that's not something that I was aware of out there at all. So.
Well, I think you were. I have written the Why There's No Luck in War Games and why every.
Oh, you reference it in there. Okay.
That one, yes.
All right. Then I may just not have been aware that that's the one you were referencing. So, hey, it's not a bad thing when there's too many things to keep up with. So, well, as you mull it over, James, did you come up with any?
Well, I come up with things, but many of them are things that we've talked about either earlier or even on the earlier podcast.
Yeah.
So if that's legal, I'm going to point to one of those things again.
Yeah, you might as well.
Because probably the thing that I point people to most is Ralph Koster's A Theory of Fun for Game Design.
Yeah.
It's light, it's really readable, but it's a really good exploration of, from his perspective, why are games fun? But I'm handing it to people to explain, you need to read this so you understand why people learn from games.
Yeah.
What's the mechanism by which that's happening? So
yeah, and it's, I mean, it'll take you less time to read that book than it will to watch an NFL game. It reads quick. It really does. So it's been on my shelf for years. I mean, going back to when I was in grad school working on game design stuff. So it's been on my shelf forever. You're right. It is a great book. So one that I had run across recently and have not read either volume of it, but kind of bookmarking them to come back to them. Are either of you familiar with war games and their history, either Volume 1 or Volume 2, from C.G. Lewin? He's on the cover of C.G. Lewin. His full name is Christopher George Lewin. They seem to be a little more minis focused, at least in Volume 1. Volume 2 gets a little more board gamey, but
I knew that John Peterson was redoing Playing at the World, but I was not aware of these at all.
Yeah, so the Volume 1 was released in 2012. Volume 2 is on pre-order right now with a release in May. That these go back into 17th, 18th, 19th century and work forward from there. So they do go back into the history of wargaming a little bit more than I think some of the other more current books do. I was not familiar with either of them. The Volume 2 popped up somewhere in one of my feeds as, hey, you should check this out. And I'd never heard of it. I went and took a look at it. Oh, that's kind of cool. Well, hey, if it's a Volume 2, where's Volume 1? And that's when I went back looking for the first one. I didn't know if either of you had any experience with it. Sounds like no. So
no.
C.G. Lewin needs to hire a better publicist and see what we can do about getting the word out there a little better.
And what was the first volume about then, if this one is going back to?
So the first one is I think is a little more on minis wargaming, but is a little more talking about the interaction of wargaming and the study of history, whereas the second one seems to be a little more the history of war games.
Okay, gotcha.
And those descriptions are coming completely from what I'm, skimming, or what I've skimmed from the Amazon descriptions, and not having read any of either.
Right.
So this is, this is all new for me. It's like, hey, who is this guy? What is this? Hey, where did this come from? They do not appear to be just a bunch of like AI slop kind of stuff that somebody threw together and just dumped on Amazon, which there's no shortage of that starting to appear even in the wargaming space. So that does not appear to be the case here. They were new to me, and I was trying to figure out sort of, where does this come from? What the heck? So something to look for. I will say for the audience, hey, look, we would be interested in what you've got on your shelf. And is there something that you've read or done or, been around that we've missed here in this conversation that, drop those notes down below. We'd love to see. None of us are going to complain about getting additional reading recommendations. We might not jump on them right away, but I don't think any of the three of us are going to gripe about, hey, here's another book you should check out. One last thought out there, and this goes back to sort of my love for the anthology approach of these things. Is there sufficient new wargaming analysis and content out there in terms of analysis of wargaming? Not so much like reviewing a game or reviewing a series of games or comparing this game to the historical battle, but approaches of wargaming as a whole that somebody ought to be picking up and running with, like the annual anthology of these things. And hey, here is the annual wargaming literature update, something or other that, ends up being a 100-page perfect bound sort of oversized journal, mini-sized book that we ought to be running with. Is there sufficient content being produced that this would be worth somebody's trouble to go after? And note for the audience, I'm not volunteering myself. I'm going to volunteer one of these guys to do it. I'm kidding, mostly. But it just seems like a lot of this stuff gets dropped out there, but sort of gets lost where the signal to noise ratio is a little too high, and it's tough for wargaming stuff, a centralized wargaming content to break through. And I know Rex tries to keep on top of a lot of stuff through PackSims, but even he can't catch it all. And I'm not sure, just a running weblog like that is an appropriate place for that level of analysis stuff. But is this something that we ought to be, committing to dead trees somewhere that can go on a shelf, has a little more permanence to it, isn't dependent on a specific person somewhere keeping the lights on a particular website? Is there enough there to make this worthwhile? James, what do you think?
So cautiously, yes. Sorry about the long pause, because I'm still sort of thinking.
We can edit it out, or we can leave it in there to let you seem like you're thinking.
I apologize for thinking. We know we're not allowed to do that. There's a lot out there. A lot of it could potentially be compiled into a book. The question for some of these articles is how many of them are very topical, and then they're an interesting read, and then sort of shot over, and let's go on to the next thing. And you could argue that many things that are put onto Dead Tree editions are much the same. But the answer, I guess, is maybe.
Yeah. Jan, what do you think? Are we?
Yeah, I don't know if... I mean, yes, I agree, maybe. I don't know if sort of a consolidated publication would be the way to go there. Maybe I don't know, thematic sort of database would be a better way to do it,
Okay.
where you just register the stuff into, have a brief sort of abstract. What is this about? What's the main focus point? And make it accessible that way instead of having to go to all the library catalogs and search for stuff. But yeah, I don't know if there is that much worth in having a sort of consolidated publication for it.
Yeah, I'm of two minds of it. One is that I'm not sure that, the Dead Tree edition resonates with people the same way at the article level, the same way that just being able to find stuff online and have relatively easy recall online allows people to more easily pick and choose what it is they want to read. Plus, then you're not paying for the Dead Tree edition that you've got to wait to arrive and then store. And now you've got 100 pages for something that you really only wanted 28 of those pages, and now you're stuck with the other 70 pages, right? So that there's that side of it versus the impermanence of things. We joke about, things online never go away, which is demonstrably crap, because I made the joke earlier about, Wargamer.com is the first Wargame article they've done since COVID. But there's a bunch of us that had written for Wargamer.com for years back in the aughts and early teens that those articles are gone. They do not exist anymore in the Wargamers archives, and you can go look and they are not there. That's one of the reasons why we have republished classic reviews and classic articles and whatever at our site since we opened the doors way back when, to be able to save a bunch of those things. Some of the reviews and articles that were written for Scry magazine, which no longer exists, have gotten republished with us because, again, we wanted to make sure that content stayed accessible over the years. And if it's just a pointer to something online, how permanent is it really versus having the Dead Tree edition somewhere? So I'm sort of torn between those two different approaches. Jan, I can totally see your perspective of, hey, why are we spending a whole lot of time and effort and energy in creating the paper edition of this when we can just point somebody to where it already exists? The flip side of it is maybe the existence of something like that sort of annual anthology or journal or whatever you wanted to call it, encourages more people to produce more for it. And knowing that there is an outlet for that kind of content, they spend a little time to develop it. Maybe that's a possibility as well. I don't know. It's sort of the academic journal that doesn't actually go through academic processes, which seems like cheating a little bit. Not really sure. But that's kind of what was on my mind, that there's a bunch of this out there, but I don't know how much people have access to it or pay attention to it or whatever. So I'm rambling a little bit. I'm not just trying to fill time, I promise, but I'm sort of working this out in real time as I talk through it. Guys, we are a little over an hour as we are recording this, which is about all I'd asked for you. And I know that, the time is getting a little ridiculous for Jan because of time zone offsets here. So we appreciate him staying up late here. Jan, I'm going to throw it to you first as we look back over this episode and other things within your wargaming reading. Is there any point we missed, or is there anything that we talked about earlier you would like to reemphasize as kind of a parting shot on the way out tonight?
Well, I guess the observation that there is a growing number of publications, which is good. Not all of them are valuable to everybody, as is with all things, but sort of a growing pool of perspectives, of diverse perspectives we can reference and pull from is a very good thing. So I'm happy about that. And my question sort of going out of this episode would be, what book should be out there that isn't right now, right? So that's the sort of looking into the future. What do we need to investigate and look into and write about that we haven't yet?
Yeah, My initial reaction to that is for your second question, what don't we have yet? We need to take Euro war games to the rest of the world, right?
We have been discussing that. I mean, even a second one on Europe would be more than appropriate because we haven't really covered that much. There's a whole lot more to dig into. And then you're absolutely right. Like, what about South America? What about Asia? What about Africa? They have a hugely growing gaming community in Africa as well, which we are mostly ignorant about. So yeah, totally agree.
Yeah. James, what about you?
Well, as Jan said, more is better, right? More perspectives, more stuff out there is better. That's, even if you don't agree with all of it, that it's a good thing to have the points of view out there. The book that feels like it's a kidney stone that I need to produce at some point is on PME Wargame. I've been doing it for a quarter century. At some point, I probably ought to codify that. That's worming its way around in my brain. So at some point that may worm its way out into my fingers.
Yeah. For folks that don't know, PME is professional military education. So for hobbyists that are still tuned in at this point in the podcast, that's what it's referencing. And so, that's something that is a particular type of the war gaming that is done within the Defense Department, but that in the national security world. And while there's, it's something that isn't a U.S. specific thing. This is something that is used all around the world in different places, the idea of wargaming as a part of professional military education. So,
and now Jan will beat me to writing the book because he's young and has more energy.
You just need some time off work to do that. That's
Yes, this thing you speak of, what is it?
I'm not going to make the obvious jokes. You know where I would be going with that, but I will say that something you both kind of mentioned is that, generally more is better. What I think is nice about the whole more is better is that for a long time, the discussion was, have you read the book on wargaming, right? Because there were two, maybe three. There was, Complete Wargames Handbook from Dunnigan. There was the, Peter Perler's Art of Wargaming, which was a little more professional focused, but still had applicability to the hobby space. Suddenly then, Simulating War shows up from Phil Sabin, and you start to get a couple of things trickle out here and there. But as we've talked about tonight, like we listed 10, 12 different, but there's still others we could be talking about. Just post-COVID, there's been a dozen of these things come out that I think now there are more options that you can find stuff that is applicable to your particular approach to wargaming, whether you're a hobbyist, a historian of it, on the professional side, which seems to be where a few more of these things are aimed. But we're to the point now where it's not just the book on wargaming, it's the book on the part of wargaming you care about. And I think if we revisit this again in another 5, 6, 7 years, it's now going to be options of books in the niche that you care about. And I think that's a good thing.
Yep.
And where James needs time to sit down and write the book, we all need time to sit down and read all these books. Give me a book on tape that I can listen to while I'm stuck commuting. That's what I need. Gentlemen, thank you for the time this evening. I do appreciate it. Looking forward to, the next book that both of y'all get to writing and put out there. For folks that are interested in these kinds of approaches for wargaming as a whole, Connections Online is coming up. As you're listening to this, we are under a month out from Connections Online 2026, but the archives from 2021 through 2025 are all available on the Dragoons YouTube channel. So you can go over there and go take a look at some of the discussions that we've had, including at least one on wargaming handbooks from 2023, I think it was, where we had an entire panel that did nothing but talk about different kinds of wargaming handbooks. There was also a couple of different panels over the years on recent articles and publications on wargaming that folks are talking about the different kinds of articles and extended pieces that were written. So those might be worth taking a look if this is a particular area of interest to you. So with that, we're going to wrap this up. Jan, thank you for staying up well past your bedtime for this. I appreciate it. And James, thank you for taking time to juggle your schedule to be a part of it. Rocky was going to be here. He's down sick, unfortunately, so we weren't able to drag him into this. We'll get him next time around. So guys, audience, thank you very much for listening. We'll catch you next time on another episode of Mention and Dispatches.